Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025, and our friend Scott Ritter is back with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Please subscribe and hit like button in order to help us reaching more people. Scott, let's start with the recognition of the Palestinian state. And we see France coming out, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, all these countries that they were somehow supporting Israel during the conflict in Gaza. And they're coming out and saying that they would recognize the state of Palestine. They're doing this because they see no other solution for what's going on in Gaza. On the other hand, you see Israelis coming out. You have the ex defense minister of Israel coming out. There would be no such a solution for two state, and they don't consider that. And here is what Naftali Bennett said.
You have the General Assembly resolution calling for a two-state solution. Are you not taking any of this as a sign that the rest of the world doesn't agree with you anymore?
Oh, no, I'm very cognizant of that. But in terms of our international position, look, it's tough. But I'd rather have my children live and be unpopular than have them killed and be beloved in the world.
So you see no solution in the mind, even those people who are not that much aligned with Netanyahu and like Naftali Bennett. You're taking what's going on.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that the European recognition of a Palestinian state doesn't advance the cause of Palestine at all. Because every single one of the nations that said we support Palestine, first of all, they say the 1967 borders. Well, how are you going to get there? So it's meaningless. I mean, unless Europe said, and we're willing to do everything that's necessary to dismantle the West Bank settlements, to compel Israel to, withdraw to the 1967 borders. It's a meaningless gesture. Two, they all said, yes, Palestine, but Hamas will not be part of the government. Hamas cannot be part of the government. It sort of undermines the whole concept of self-determination as set forth by the United Nations in its charter. Just a second. Right before the show, something flew right in my eye. So it's wedged in there someplace. The self-determination. So, if there was an election today in, where Palestinians live, Hamas would win. I mean, the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas has no legitimacy. It's seen, rightly so, as having sold out to Israel a long time ago. Fatah is an empty movement. The only Palestinian party that believes in an independent Palestine, is willing to fight for an independent Palestine, is Hamas. And yet the will of the Palestinian people will not be respected. It is not being respected because in Gaza they have voted and Hamas won the vote. These are just empty words, meaningless. As for Israel, look, Israel's committing suicide. And if you believe in a Palestinian state, sometimes the best thing to do is just sit back and let Israel do what it's doing, because there's no worst enemy to Israel than Israel is to itself. Sadly, the cost that's associated with this suicide is measured in tens of thousands of Palestinian lives that are being lost on a daily basis, tragically. Women and children whose remnants of their bodies are literally being scraped off of walls. Disemboweled children. I mean, the photographs are there if people want to see them. If you'd like, there's certain video clips you can listen to where you get to listen to Palestinians scream as they burn to death in the aftermath of the Israeli bombing of the building. The evidence is there. For anybody who pretends that there isn't a genocide taking place, there isn't ethnic cleansing taking place, I have no use for you, literally, because it means that you deliberately deceive yourself and you're willing to do so in the face of some of those horrific organized slaughter in modern times. But this is the price that has to be paid for freedom. I remind people that Normandy wasn't liberated, void of civilian casualties. Up to 60,000 French civilians died in the liberation of Normandy in World War II, and civilians die all the time in conflicts. And for the Palestinians to get their freedom, and the only way forward was something that Sinwar noted back in October 7th. Think about what October 7th was. It was not just an ambush of Israel in terms of attacking Israel and inflicting a military defeat on Israel and taking people hostage. But what was the purpose of the defeat and the hostage? It was to lure Israel into Gaza to do what? To be Israel. You see, the Palestinians know the truth about Israel, but it's a truth that the world has been shielded from. The Palestinians know that the Israelis are despicable human beings who don't value human life, who are fully capable of raping Palestinian women repeatedly in order to break them to get them work for the Israeli secret services, to torture and murder children, to bulldoze homes, to allow settlers to come in and steal the land of people. The Palestinians know full well the racism that exists in the apartheid regime of Israel. But the problem is the Israelis are great. They have great PR. And they've bought Europe and the United States. They own the media establishment. They've bought the politicians. And so Israeli PR is able to be blasted all over the place on the airwaves, on the newspapers, everything. And the average American, average European sees, oh, the Israelis are the good guys. They're just like us. I mean, I think the Israelis, to show you the genius, the evil genius of their propaganda, I think Netanyahu just posed with a poster that said 50 states, one Israel, as if we're the same, as if the 50 American states in Israel, we're the same. They're us, we're them. It's all okay. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. But we're not them, and they aren't us. I just want to remind your audience, the Israelis hate Americans. They do. They openly despise us. Why else would they attack the USS Liberty? Why else would they authorize their government to recruit Jonathan Pollard and spy against the United States? Why else would they have their tanks attempt to run over a Marine captain in Beirut in 1983? Why else would they continue to spy on the United States repeatedly? Israel isn't our friends. They're not even close to being our friends. Israel interferes in our democracy more than any other nation in the world. That's not what a friend does. Israel uses the United States because without the United States, Israel can't exist. Israel is a parasite, a literal parasite that has attached itself to the American host. That works so long as the host views the parasite as being harmless, or in the case of Israel, tricking the host into believing the parasite is actually an extension of itself. But what happens when the host wakes up and goes, this parasite isn't not only not me, but it's doing me harm. It's sucking the life juice out of me. Then you seek to expel the parasite. And that can't happen until the host recognizes the evil reality that is Israel. And what Israel is doing right now is showing to the world, showcasing how evil they are. And it's having an impact here in the United States. And this is where Naftali Bennett gets it wrong. Because it's not going to be the world, having your children live in a world where, they call you names. There will not be an Israel when this finishes. The Israeli state will be terminated. It's not that there won't be a Palestinian state. I agree with Naftali, but there won't be a two-state solution. No. Palestine will exist. Israel won't. Israel is finished. It's done. The world cannot tolerate Israel as it currently exists, and the world is turning away from it. And we start to see this in incremental fashion, with Europe starting to recognize this notion of a Palestinian state. But the real damage will come when the United States turns its back on Israel. And we're starting to see movement there. Now, the question is, will there be any Palestinians left when this is finished? The bad news is Israel's just killing them off in huge numbers. I mean, even the Israelis have to acknowledge that the harm they've done, that the data that's coming out from Palestine is significant, and the vast majority of the people being killed are civilians. But the other reality is Israel can't win this war. I mean, as we speak, the IDF is being slaughtered, butchered in Gaza, in occupied Gaza. And it's just going to get worse. I mean, we are talking, the Hamas fighters are underground. They're dug in. They know the terrain. Israel's moving in. They can temporarily occupy space above the ground, until which time Hamas fighters emerge, put a mine on. And every day you read about, an entire tank crew consumed by fire after an explosion. And the death toll is just mounting over and over and over again. All these Israelis that took photographs in the early days of the war of them, doing this, that, or other thing in Gaza are now dying, because death will catch up to every single one of the Israeli occupiers should they opt to remain in Gaza. Death is the only solution, death or retreating. But Israel will not occupy Gaza. They cannot win the battle in Gaza. And this pipe dream of developing Gaza into some sort of elite, resort land, it's Jared Kushner's wet fantasy, wet dream. It's not going to happen. Gaza is part of Palestine, and the Palestinians have shown they're willing to fight and die for Gaza. And Israel will not win. This is the future. This is the future. Israel's finished. Netanyahu acknowledges the growing isolation of Israel, and he says we will have to learn to live, to be self-sufficient. What a joke. Israel, self-sufficient? Name one thing they're self-sufficient in. They can't produce they have to buy all their weapons from us, or they have to buy the material that goes into the weapons from us. Their economy is totally dependent upon outside investment. Nobody's investing in Israel right now. Nobody can, because Israel's a basket case, basically, a de facto, blockade from the south by the Houthi. Israel's one hope. If you remember back in September, I think, of 2023, before October 7th, September 12th, perhaps, Biden was in India, and he made a speech about the Indian, Middle East, European economic corridor. And Netanyahu immediately came out and said, this is not an exaggeration, this is one of the most important days in the history of Israel. Now, why? Why would that be one of the most important days? Because if that economic corridor came into being, the concept that was first envisioned in the Abrams Accord of this unified economic system with Israel as the heart, the financial heart, the technology heart of this system, made Israel viable for the first time. Israel could survive on its own because there would be the economic ability to, do what needs to be done without the American taxpayer underwriting this. And Netanyahu recognized the importance of that liberation from the American taxpayer. Most important day in modern Israeli history. That's gone. There is no more Abrams Accord. There is no more Middle East economic corridor. Israel is isolated. And so when Netanyahu says that Israel survive, using its own resources, it will become self-sufficient. What he's really saying is that Israel survive based upon the largesse provided by the American taxpayer. That is a window that is closing. It's not closing overnight, but we see growing animosity, resentment, and opposition to America's continued underwriting of the Israeli nation. And when we decide to stop writing the checks, Israel no longer exists.
Scott, you mentioned the PR of Israelis being dominant somehow. We can argue that among the elites in the West, as Emmanuel Macron said, there is no genocide. He doesn't have the evidence to prove that there is no. But you see people on the street in Italy coming out, huge protests against the foreign policy of Italy vis-a-vis Gaza and Palestine. And this is Meloni. She didn't talk about. She doesn't recognize the state of Palestine. How do you see the difference between the public opinion and the elites, and who's going to have the upper hand in a long run, in your opinion?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, the political elites, are hostage to a global system that Zionism has insinuated itself into. But you're starting to see, why then would political elites in England and in Germany, Spain, Portugal, and elsewhere, why would they break ranks with this system and support something that Zionism doesn't support? It's because they recognize the reality of their constituents and the the posture taken by their constituents. That politicians they love only one thing, and that's staying in power. That's it. They don't believe in anything else. They just believe in staying in power, and they will do whatever it takes to stay in power. Understand that none of these nations, opted to recognize Palestine's, the Palestinian state in the 1967 borders because they're morally they have a moral conscience. No, they had a moral conscience, they would have recognized a long time ago. They're doing it now because it's politically necessary for them to make this move, because the people on the streets, even though Macron can't say there's a genocide, the people on the streets know damn well there's a genocide. And Maloney will feel the heat as well. I don't think what is happening here is reversible. I think Israel is incapable of changing the world's opinion, because they've gone too far. They've sold themselves out to a political, to their own political elites who have said things that are reprehensible. The things they say about the Palestinians and about Greater Israel and about what Israel can and can't do aren't just words. They're backed by actions of Israel actually carrying out genocide, bombing people, whoever they want. Israel has shown itself to be incompatible with international law. They straight up acknowledge that they are accountable to nobody, no law. They will do anything they want. And at some point in time, this makes them incompatible with humanity. And that's where we are right now. We're seeing humanity, the people, recognize the true evil nature of this Israeli enterprise, this Zionist enterprise. And the political elites, because they believe in staying in power, are being compelled to make adjustments in order to appease. But as I said, it's purely words right now. I believe nations when they say they want to hold Israel accountable, when they blockade Israel, when they prevent weapons from being sold to Israel, when they talk about the termination of the Israeli state with the same enthusiasm that they spoke about the termination of Saddam Hussein, or Vladimir Putin. But for now, they continue to have diplomatic relations with Israel. They continue to treat Israel, as a societal norm. Israel isn't. It's an aberration and should be treated as such.
Here is, Scott, what Tom Brock, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, said about the Israeli position or the situation of Israel in the aftermath of October 7th.
In general, after October 7th, everything has changed in the Middle East, everything. And Bibi Netanyahu will tell you, he's not concerned about borders. He's not concerned about the red line, the blue line, the green line. If he feels that his borders or his people are being threatened, he will go anywhere and do anything. Full stop.
So I don't know what else can he say. It's all about Netanyahu and his decisions. No one else is going to be able to influence him and Israel. So how is that going to help Israel if they go in that direction, in your opinion?
It won't. I'd like to introduce Mr. Thomas Barak to the United Nations and its charter, and the fact that Israel just says it is operating in total independence of the legal justification for its existence. I also want to remind Mr. Barak of the United States Constitution and the Supremacy Clause, because the United Nations Charter was, after all, ratified by the United States Senate. And according to the Supremacy Clause, anytime the United States enters into a treaty like the United Nations Charter that's been ratified by the Senate, it becomes the supreme law of the land. We are bound by it. And yet we will sit by and let Israel openly violate this, which means we stand for nothing. But again, this is at least Barak. You gotta admire the how refreshing it is to have an American diplomat just be straight up honest that we don't care about anything. After all, he did say about the Lebanese army, we don't want them to be strong. We don't want them to be able to defend Lebanon from Israel. We just want them to be able to beat Hezbollah. Okay, well, that means everything he says is a joke. And that's where we're at right now. This is a tragic joke, because normally anybody who took this position that Barack has articulated, it's okay to accurately quantify what Netanyahu believes in. But then it must be immediately followed up by, and of course, America objects to this, and we will reject and oppose all Israeli actions that operate in violation of international law set forth by the United Nations Charter that the United States has ratified, and therefore, through the Supremacy Clause, the United States Constitution is the law of the land. But he didn't. So it just shows that this administration has totally lost touch with who we are and what we are collectively as Americans.
Scott, do you think that Donald Trump is afraid of Netanyahu? Do you think that Netanyahu has some sort of leverage in him? Because when you look at the way Tom Barak said about the end game in Israel, in the Middle East, you see no end game. He says no end game. Here is what he said.
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that, because I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Look, the end game, when we say peace, it's an illusion. There's never been peace. There will probably never be peace, because everybody's fighting for legitimacy. The end result is somebody wants dominance, which means somebody has to submit. In that part of the world, submit, there's no Arabic word for submit. They can't wrap their head around submit. So eventually, prosperity is the only answer.
Yeah, it's so tricky the way he's talking about this situation, Scott. But I think the outcome is that no end game is in sight in the case of Israel and Middle East. I don't know how is that going. Donald Trump was somehow, he said that he's going to do something about it, but you don't see anything coming from the administration so far. How, with the case of Charlie Kirk and what we've learned, how is the relationship between Donald Trump and Netanyahu? How do you evaluate that?
I don't know. I mean, sadly, Donald Trump's turned out to be an illusion of the man he wants us to believe he is. I personally believe that he is a moral and intellectual coward. First of all, he's not that smart. He might have innate common sense and New York City real estate business acumen, but about the world we live in, he's as ignorant as the day is long. I mean, how many times can you sit there and misidentify Armenia without acknowledging you couldn't even point where Armenia is on the map, let alone describe the complexities of the Armenian-Azerbaijani relationship? Nagorno-Karabakh, let's talk about that. He doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know anything. So the Zangezur corridor, talk about that. He can't. Only superficially, without any acknowledgement. So we're dealing with an intellectual lightweight. That doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. Sometimes the less you think, the stronger you can be, because you only know one thing: brute force. But Donald Trump doesn't know brute force in the traditional sense of the word. Brute force is brute force. It's not bullying. And Donald Trump is just a bully. Donald Trump will never stand up to anybody who stands up to him. This is why we see he strikes, even when he takes a so-called decisive military strike against Iran. It was done negotiated as part of a, complex series of agreements reached to bring about a ceasefire that Israel demanded because they lost the war. We now know this to be the case. We know Israel begged Donald Trump to intervene on a ceasefire because they couldn't sustain this conflict. Iran agreed because they had taken some heavy hits. But the Iran today is in a far stronger position. And Donald Trump will not stand up to this Iran because we can't afford the price that will be paid. Venezuela, he bombs fishing boats and calls it a great victory. Let's see how the Venezuelan government reacts. If it shows weakness, it's doomed. It's finished. You show strength, Donald Trump will back down. He isn't going to do anything against Russia because Russia will do something against him. He won't do anything against China because China will do something against him. Anytime somebody stands up to Donald Trump, he folds like a house of cards. Israel is the easiest problem in the world to solve, but you have to be decisive. I could solve Israel today, right now, if I were the president of the United States. I would sign an executive order that finds AIPAC to be a foreign agent, and all any Jewish American organization that has a relationship with Israel must immediately register as a foreign agent. I would send U.S. Marshals in and shut them all down. I would seize their bank accounts, seize their money, seize the private money of anybody who does business with Israel. I would immediately close down the Israeli embassy and arrest every Israeli diplomat as a foreign agent and put them in a concentration camp. Not the kind that kills people, but the kind that we do anytime there's a war. You always arrest the people and put them in. It'd be a nice little federal prison. They could sit there and play ping pong and volleyball and all that stuff, live in comfort, watch TV. But no, they're done. And any Israeli that resists dies instantaneously. All the Israeli agents out here would be arrested. If they resist, they die. And I would tell the Israeli government that we're stopping all coordination, cooperation with you. We're shutting you down unless you agree to our terms. They would have no choice. People say, well, you could be assassinated. Not really. Not if you lie. Not if you strike first. And the way you strike first is anybody in the U.S. government that has a relationship with Israel gets arrested. It's a crime. And we do that all the time. We arrest people who commit espionage on behalf of China, Russia, Iran. Everybody who has this relationship with Israel now where they freely pass classified information is committing espionage. They're spies. Shut it down. Shut it all down. Make Israel the illegal enterprise that it is. But the president won't do that because he's a coward. He's a coward. And if you don't act decisively, because Israel has insinuated itself so thoroughly in the American fabric, then you pay political price. Then you find yourself being sniped at, boom, 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 and you open the door to somebody putting a bullet in your head. Okay, but if we acknowledge Israel to be the enemy it is, because Israel is an enemy of the United States in every way, shape, or form, it certainly isn't a friend of free speech. If you believe in free speech, you let people speak freely. And if you haven't done anything wrong, you have a better idea, you have nothing to fear. If people want to engage in a debate and a dialogue, you do so. And if you have the better ideas, you prevail. Look at Charlie Kirk. First of all, let me preface this. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to. I knew who Charlie Kirk was only because he appears on my, every once in a while when you go through X, you get in one of those video loops where you look at a video and then when it finishes, it clicks to another one and you're like, oh, okay, I'll watch this. Next thing you know, you've gone down the rabbit hole and you've watched like 15 videos in a row, most of which you didn't want to watch. Every once in a while, you get Charlie Kirk demeaning a college audience. And that's what he was good at. He was good at going to colleges, bringing up ignorant college students and engaging in pseudo debates and exposing their ignorance. It doesn't mean that all college students are ignorant. It doesn't mean that Charlie Kirk wins every debate. It means that the way he was packaged, that's what he did. And I just found it interesting because I disagreed about 90% of what he said. And I always expected college students to do better, but they never did. And I was always curious as to why Charlie Kirk wins his debates. He wins his debate because it's a controlled debate. He's very clever at how he approached this. But needless to say, Charlie Kirk was somebody who started to change his narrative about Israel. He started to question things because, Charlie Kirk's not a stupid individual. Actually, what he does is very clever and requires a great deal of acumen. But the other thing that Charlie Kirk ensured is that he wasn't going to lose a debate because he would always, the top topics would be, he'd shape everything and get into a point where, he could bring forward rhetorical arguments that, overwhelmed his opponent. And if the opponent wasn't totally knowledgeable of every nuance, of every facet of the data that Charlie Kirk brought to bear, then he would, they would get, they would have to submit. But on Israel, you can't explain away genocide. And if you're America First, you can't explain away taxpayer money going to Israel when we need investment here. And people were starting to question. And Charlie Kirk wasn't able to control that line of debate anymore. And so he started to shift because his whole shtick isn't about debating, because debate, you win some, you lose some. You either are better prepared. His whole shtick was dominating the conversation. And he could no longer dominate the conversation about Israel. And he started to change. Now, I don't know who killed Charlie Kirk. Do you? FBI claims they have a suspect, but I'm not going to sit here and I don't know. I know he's dead. I believe he was murdered. He was murdered violently, and they have a suspect. So regardless of the case they have, due process requires that it goes through the court of law and all this kind of stuff. I don't know what the motivations of this person were. There's a lot of people out there that claim they know. They don't know. They suspect. They believe. But no one knows except the person who actually killed Charlie Kirk. And if they've got that person, hopefully, through a trial done in accordance with the rule of law, motivation will emerge, and we can bring closure to this. But I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon that said Israel did it, because there's just no evidence that's been put forward yet that sustains that. One can make an argument, and Max Blumenthal in the Gray Zone is leading the charge on making the argument that the Israeli government wasn't happy with Netanyahu, and that pressure was being brought to bear financially, arm twisting, shouting. If the accounts of what happened in the Hamptons are accurate, that it appears that if they are accurate, that Charlie Kirk was feeling pressure. Did he fear for his life? I don't know. I mean, if he did, he didn't show it because he was just a sitting duck out there when he died. But what I do know is that his death has impacted free speech in a radical fashion. Two ways. One, it has a chilling effect on people who do public speaking about issues that are unpopular. I mean, I myself have been marked for death by pro-Ukrainian elements. And is there a concern that copycat killers may say now it's time to suppress everybody, especially those who've been marked to death by the Ukrainian government? My positions against Israel, I don't imagine are popular in Israel today. So if the Israelis are in the business of killing people who publicly oppose them, well, gosh, that puts me in trouble too. I don't lose sleep over it, but I mean, if I said that I wasn't like, gosh, should I really do this outdoor speaking event today? The answer is I think about it, because if somebody wants you killed, they're going to kill you, especially if you just make yourself a sitting duck by standing in the open speaking in an environment that's not secure. That's a chilling effect, because now to secure that environment, not everybody can afford that. So that means now that we've created a price for free speech. Can you afford to create a secure environment to speak? And if that's the case, then you're no longer speaking freely because there's a price to be paid. The other thing too is the backlash, because now people who proclaim to be, practitioners of free speech are now seeking to suppress the speech of anybody they disagree with, especially if you're pro Charlie Kirk. Anybody who dared, say something bad about Charlie Kirk, is being deplatformed. That's not free speech. Almost criminalized. You have Donald Trump speaking of the criminalization of this. That's not free speech. And so, what's happened with Charlie Kirk is and what's happened surrounding Charlie Kirk's murder is detrimental to the cause of free speech. The last thing it does, even if Israel isn't behind these deaths, just assume that Israel isn't killing people. And again, I want to point out that we have no evidence that Israel is. But the fear that Israel could, because remember, it's not as though Israel doesn't kill people. They assassinate people all the time. It's an intimidating thing. This concept of this Israeli rogue nation, this illegal enterprise out there, Murder Incorporated. That's what they do. They murder people. They commit genocide. And so now if you're the president of the United States and you're already a weak man, and I believe Donald Trump is a fundamentally weak man who has already sold his soul to the Zionist enterprise, which he has done. This Charlie Kirk's dead, and now you've surrounded yourself with people, some of whom are saying Israel did it. Tucker Carlson. What does a weak man do? And I think by watching Donald Trump, we see exactly what a weak man does. But the bottom line is, look, if this was any other nation in the world doing to America what Israel is doing to America, we would have gone to war against them a long time.
Scott, when it comes to Charlie Kirk, many people who are familiar with his interviews, recent interviews, and talking about Netanyahu, you see a guy that has no love for Netanyahu and his administration. He didn't show any sort of love for them, any sort of, passion for them. But what is the obsession of Netanyahu with the case of Charlie Kirk? He's coming out and, tweeting and finally publishing a video on his personal YouTube channel addressing that Israel is not behind, that he's not behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk. How can, because many people are thinking, what is this obsession? Where does it come from?
Yeah, I mean, superficially, you'd say you complain too much, therefore you must be guilty. I personally, I'm an open-minded. I'm willing to be shown data to convince me otherwise. I don't think Israel killed Charlie Kirk because Israel gained nothing from killing Charlie Kirk. Nothing at all. If you wanted to beat Charlie Kirk, you remove his money and you work on delegitimizing him, deplatforming, destroying his image. This is all things Israel's very good at doing. Killing him? No, that's a bridge too far. What Netanyahu fears is, Israel's support amongst the American Jewish population is there. I mean, the American Jews that are against Israel are already against Israel, and the American Jews that are for Israel will forever be for Israel. But the American Jewish population is a very narrow segment of American society. In order to give Zionism a fighting chance to exist in a nation like America that today is going through economic, downturn, and we no longer have infinite resources to give away. People are starting to actually look at money and say it should be invested here in America. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a living example of this. And so we've got one of these unique accidents of history where you have a segment of American conservative population, the Christian Zionists, people who buy into an interpretation of Revelations that basically says we're waiting for the rapture. We're waiting for the world to end. We're waiting for Jesus to come back. And there's a significant percentage of these people, especially in red states. I mean, these are the people that empower Ted Cruz, a United States senator who has said straight up, I joined the Senate so I could serve Israel. Really? I thought it was to serve people of Texas, but silly me. So these are, this is a group of people that's been, historically supporting Israel because it supports their, perverted notion of the end of the world. I just can't imagine voting for a politician who honestly believes that the best thing that could happen is for the world to end. Then just go home and wait for it to end. But if you're a politician, serve the American people, which means you're supposed to try and make the world better for America, better for the American people. And if you believe in God and believe in Jesus and you believe in the scripture, imagine the hubris that says, I have to help God fulfill God's will. I would imagine that if God wanted it done, it's going to get done. And so if the world's supposed to end, it's going to end, whether Ted Cruz wants it to end or not. So you sort of contradict yourself when you say God is all powerful, God is all knowing, God is magnificent, God is this, God is that. And yet I have to run for the United States Senate so I can help God do his thing. Did God ask for your help? No. I mean, it's the stupidity, the inconsistency of this whole argument. But these are the same people that tend to be MAGA people, make America great again. And they've bought into this political notion that we have to stop, being the world's policeman. We have to stop giving money away to the world. We need to invest in America. We need to do what's good for America again. So now we come to this conflict between MAGA and the Christian Zionists. And Charlie Kirk, I think, was in the midst of that, because a lot of the Christian conservative movement that Charlie Kirk appealed to is caught in this intellectual conundrum of Israel, America first, what do we do? And Kirk, because he is an effective communicator, was starting to make inroads into the Christian evangelical community, to have people starting to say, I mean, because listen to the people that he had. No, Israel has a right to exist, and we need to support Israel's right to exist. But Israel's a strong country; they can pay for it themselves. We shouldn't be paying them. We should be investing money here. So it wasn't that the people were walking away from Israel. They continued to say, no, we believe in Israel. We support Israel, but we just don't want to send American taxpayer the money, which means, when you break it down, you're trying to kill Israel. And Netanyahu knows this. He knows this. That's what he's scared of. And so his speech wasn't about truly denying something that Israel did. His speech was to try and tell people, we didn't do it, so don't stop questioning us. Stop buying into this narrative, because the debate that's happening right now, this Israel did it debate, it's undermining Israel's long-term viability, because it's eroding support amongst Israel, among the very constituent that Israel has to continue to hold sway over, American evangelical Christian Zionists. They're starting to question this support to Israel and whether supporting Israel is good for America. And if you make America great again, and you suddenly wake up one day and you go, Israel is bad for America, that's a bad day for Israel. And that's what Netanyahu's trying to stop.
That could be understood, Scott, with the PR among the public opinion and young people in the United States, because they felt somehow that in the aftermath of the assassination, they can take over the movement, they can reshape it in favor of Israel. That's why Ben Shapiro went there to the headquarters, to the.
You mean the Jewish Zionist who has publicly derided Christianity and Jesus and talked about how bad and evil and feckless Christianity is, suddenly saying that he, a Jewish Zionist, is now going to be the voice of Christianity because we're the same thing. That Ben Shapiro?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, exactly what I'm talking about. But Scott, do you feel that Israel going to be able to reshape the movement in favor of Israel in a long run, investing, and I don't know, how is that going to be possible? Even because Charlie Kirk, when you look at his character, he was the heart of the movement that he started. Without him, no one else is going to be able to communicate the way he was able to do.
But Charlie Kirk was a cult of personality, to be honest. He was very good at what he did. I will never, as I said, I don't agree with a lot of what Charlie Kirk said. And when I first watched it, I mean, because there's the Jesse Waters, I guess, is a Fox News kind of guy who goes out and humiliates college students on the street. At least he used to, and I found it to be funny. I mean, it just, it's like, come on, man, if you don't know this, but it didn't advance anything other than entertainment. When I first saw Charlie Kirk, doing his college debates, I wrote it off as sort of a more intellectual version of what Jesse Waters is doing, just a higher spectrum of public humiliation of college students. But because Waters, you just know, is farce. I don't take anything Waters does seriously. He's just a walking, talking joke. But Kirk, after a while, you had to look at it and go, actually, he's serious. This isn't farcical. What he's doing is actually very serious. And there's a method to his madness. I mean, there was a whole lot more preparation to Charlie Kirk's college debates than that met the eye, at least my interpretation of it, because to give the answers he gave is rehearsed. I mean, he's rehearsed these answers, which means he's leading an audience into an intellectual ambush. Getting their question, then throwing it back, controlling, by responding the way he does, he takes this broad answer and then he narrows it by his response, and then they get sucked into that trap, and then he continues to narrow until he overwhelms you with data and you look stupid. And it happened every single time. And I'm like, whoa, this guy's pretty polished. It's pretty good. But it's a skill set that he mastered, and it can't be replicated. It's like Rush Limbaugh. Nobody's been able to fill Rush Limbaugh's, niche. Nobody will fill Charlie Kirk's niche. And without that, the movement he's created is going to die. Israel isn't going to be able to turn this around. There's no amount of money that Israel can. How much more money does Israel have to pour into this? They already bought everything. They control everything. But you can't control truth. And what we're seeing right now are some harsh truths. Israel is a genocidal state. You can't undo that. No amount of money can change what we see on TV. And Israel is bad for America. No amount of money can change that reality. And so I don't see Israel reversing course. I don't see them succeeding in this pathetic effort to get Ben Shapiro to come in and take over the bloody microphone of Charlie Kirk. It's going to fail. Israel cannot be saved. The Titanic, once it hit the iceberg, couldn't be saved. You could fake it for a while, but it's going down. Israel has hit the iceberg. They're going down. And no matter what you do right now to try and change the public debate about Israel, isn't going to change that reality. The genocidal state of Israel is incompatible with global humanity and incompatible with American values. And the American people are waking up to this. The world is waking up to this. And because Israel won't change, they're going to, submit implies, going back to Thomas Barak, that you bend the knee. Submission can be obtained other ways too, like beheading. It's the final submission. Israel isn't going to bend a knee. That I agree. If you don't think Israel is going to be beheaded, think again. It's finished. This illegal enterprise we call Zionism is finished. And you see it through every act of desperation that takes place. Everything Israel does today is an act of desperation. It's a bloody act of desperation. It's a tragic act of desperation, but it's an act of desperation. When you have to admit that no law applies to you, because if you ever obey the law, your survival is at risk, you're acknowledging your inherent incompatibility with the norms and values of humankind. And Thomas Barak just condemned Israel by saying that. There are no red lines, blue lines, green lines. There are no lines. There's nothing Israel won't do to survive, which means Israel is inherently incompatible with human life. It's the ultimate parasite. And the ultimate parasite will suffer the fate of all parasites because they can't live without a host. And when the host starts rejecting the parasite, it's all she wrote.
So what's going to be the game changer for Israel out of this desperation? How is that going to change? Because let's assume that the final goal of Israel of attacking Iran again. Here is what we've learned, Scott, about one of the members of the Iran's National Security Commission. He said that the MiG-29 has arrived in Iran. Su-35s are on the way in significant numbers. HQ-9s are coming in volume, and S-400 is already in Iran. They have received S-400. When this guy is talking to the government, he's a what he's talking about is to Iranian media, it's not to international media. And he's talking, why are we so shy in talking this way to the international community, that we are so much prepared for any sort of attack on the part of Israelis? And how do you see that? How do you think that that's still an option for Israel to attack Iran, to change the game, to show that Israel is alone and Iran is the worst enemy? And how do you find that?
At the moment, Israel, even though it's an illegal enterprise, there's still a modicum of rationality behind what Israel does. The fact that you have these acts of desperation implies that Israel knows what should be but isn't, and they're desperate to get it back to what should be. Never forget that Israel begged the United States to bring it into the 12-day war because Israel was losing. What allowed Israel to inflict harm on Iran was perfidy. I mean, America claiming they want to have a negotiation and Iran being lulled into this false sense of complacency. Perfidy on the side of the International Atomic Energy Agency that used the unique access they enjoyed monitoring Iran's nuclear program to share sensitive information about Iranian nuclear scientists, Iranian nuclear programs with nations hostile to Israel, hostile to Iran, who then shared it with Israel, and Israel incorporated their targeting. Perfidy on the part of Iran that not only allows Israel and the United States to maintain massive intelligence programs on their soil to spy on Iran, to, in the case of Israel, to build these complex agents of networks of agents who were empowered to produce drones domestically inside Iran and use those drones to strike Iran, but also to allow Israel to use their airspace to get into the Caspian Sea and strike Tehran from its, unprotected rear. These advantages don't exist anymore. Iran has effectively nullified all of these advantages and shored up potential, weak points that could be exploited by Israel. But Israel hasn't done anything to protect itself, nor is there anything Israel can do to protect itself from the reality of Iran's ballistic missile supremacy. Iran in the 12-day war made heavy use of 20 to 30-year-old missiles early on in the early stages. And these succeeded in absorbing a tremendous amount of the Israeli defensive capabilities, allowing some to get through. But the bottom line is that Iran possesses sufficient quantities of missiles that don't require you to overwhelm the system. They are automatically superior to anything that the system can do to protect itself. And Iran started using these missiles near the tail end of the 12-day war. And Israel knows this. Israel knows that they were sitting ducks. This is why they begged for the ceasefire, because it was over. Iran was starting to hit critical infrastructure, critical targets. And the Israelis went, there's nothing we could do to stop this. We need this to end. Iran has all those capabilities and more. I always laughed at some people go, oh, why doesn't Russia provide Iran with the Oreshnik missile? The Oreshnik, Russia's ace in the hole, because Iran has the Oreshnik. It's just the Iranian version of the Oreshnik, and Israel knows Iran has this Oreshnik. They probably have them in sufficient numbers to do significant harm to Israel, and so Iran. I don't think Israel believes that they can attack Iran and get away with it. Hello, Larry.
Hey,
Hello, Larry. Welcome, Larry.
I'm finishing up. I'm just sitting here bashing Israel.
I'm a little early.
Yeah, but no, I and then but the important thing about what this guy was saying, and I don't know if a lot of people picked up on this, he was petitioning the supreme leader to modify the fatwa. He was saying that the fatwa prohibiting, Iran from possessing nuclear weapons should be modified to preventing Iran from using nuclear weapons, but that Iran must build nuclear weapons and have them just in case Israel decided to use nuclear weapons against Iran, that Iran must have a nuclear deterrence, that it's not good enough to have sufficient conventional military power to thwart a future Israeli attack and to respond conventionally to Israel. That as long as Israel retains a nuclear advantage, Iran will always be in a difficult position, and that the only way to protect against this nuclear disadvantage was to have your own nuclear retaliation capability. And sadly, I think this is the direction that Iran is going. You know, Iran did everything they could to adhere to its commitment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but the United States and Europe simply won't allow Iran to live in accordance with the Nuclear Article 4 of which allows Iran to have nuclear enrichment for a peaceful program, and all the data shows that that's the direction Iran was going. Because of the snapback sanction decision made by Europe now, Iran has ceased all cooperation with the IAEA, and I think they're one step away from withdrawing from the NPT. And the moment they withdraw from the NPT, you can assume that means that they have gone nuclear. The transition will be almost immediate, and that's a game changer. That's a game changer in the Middle East.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thanks. All right. Have a good one, Larry.
Larry.
Take care. Take care.
Bye.
How's it going, Larry?
Real drill this morning doing Turkish TRT.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to use a different system, and I just refuse to download all these damn things on my computer. And we finally wound up with a party line or something like that. She gave me a direct line. Tamlin Davis gave me a direct line into the studio, which was kind of neat. And there was a coincidence of views that I wasn't expecting. I thought they had set it up to be there were three of us, somewhat of a debate. But the Palestinian professor, I was pretty sure would be on the same wavelength I was. The Jewish professor from London, I thought would probably be the antagonist, if you will. We all three were on the same sheet of music. And if anything, the Londoner was even more adamant about the Starmer's isolation. And, could you walk through London and find anyone for Starmer now? Probably not. And a lot of it is Gaza.
Larry, the recognition of the state of Palestine, in your opinion, it comes from the decision.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay.
You're on.
Excuse me. Okay.
Welcome, by the way.
Thank you. No need.
Larry,
we're all friends.
Yeah, exactly. Here is, Larry, what Tom Brock, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, said about Israel, and how is the position of Israel for the United States of America.
For Israel as a valued ally, we subsidize them $4 to $5 billion a year. It has a special place in America's heart. And we're living with the confusion of what's happening in this transition.
So,
Confusion? Confusion? Murder, genocide, homicide, starvation, a whole people being wiped out before our eyes. Where's his ocular vision pointed? I mean, this is... I watched Max Blumenthal this morning. I've turned to Max in the Gray Zone more and more now because the truth is coming out up there. And he called, a wonderful phrase, he called the New York Times and others like them, and I'd put that guy in the same boat, stenographers for empire, the imperial stenographers. And that's what they are. He held up, or I guess Afshan did on Going Underground, he held up the picture of the New York Times from 20 months ago or so, where there's nothing Absolutely nothing. Then he held up the more recent one where they show the starving Palestinian on the front page, and he says, how long did it take them to go from that to this? And how culpable are they in misleading the American people? And part of the reason the American people are awakening is not the New York Times. They're following the people, as it were. The reason the American people are awakening is because of alternative media and because of people like Max Blumenthal. And I have to say, because of people at the end of his life, like Charlie Kirk and like Marjorie Taylor Greene and like Tom Massey from Kentucky, who are or have been all along criticizing the relationship with Israel as strongly as anyone should be criticizing it. And now the American people are listening. So I don't give people like that any credibility at all. They are curmudgeons who are tacked in with the oligarchs who benefit. And you know how I feel, Nima. The one thing I objected, I watched Doug McGregor again this morning for about an hour. And while almost everything he said I agreed with, you got to stop saying that Israel is the one leading the United States. That's not true at all. The United States of America, the American empire, wants what is happening in the Levant to happen. Now, the coincidence of brutality, the coincidence of homicide, the coincidence of violating utterly international law, a law we helped conceive, all of that is shared equally. And Bibi is the prima facie murderer, if you will. But the people enabling it, he couldn't be doing this without the empire. The empire is orchestrating this, and it is orchestrating a new attack on Iran. Thank you very much. I just watched Bibi talking to his English receiving audience, and he's all over China. Why is he all over China? He's all over China because of two reasons. One, China has become very outspoken in its support of Iran and in its support of Russia in support of Iran. And China is, and Bibi reads our defense strategy, still, even with the retrenchment strategy, very much a part of our defense strategy. And so if he brings China in, he brings our number one opponent in the world in. Iran is down there somewhere in the middle. China's up there at the top. So here's a shrewd Hitlerian type guy. It's like Hitler talking to, the people he had to agree with before he started his massive campaigns, like the Soviet Union in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Compact. He's making all these deals. He's saying all these things because he's going to war with Iran. And he wants to make sure the United States is with him. And what better way to do that than to talk about China being a part of and in support of Iran? This is preparation for World War. In his mind, it's preparation for World War. A World War that will, one, extract Israel, he thinks, from its very existential situation right now. And it would be purely existential against Israel if Israel went alone to war with Iran, and save himself politically, and probably more important to him personally, because he'll go to jail just like Sharon did. So this is what we're basing geopolitical, geostrategic reality on today in the empire, is this character that we've created. We created it. And it wasn't Trump that created him. It was George W. Bush when he turned to Ariel Sharon in 2004 and told him, everything's failed. The roadmap, the Middle East peace process, Oslo, everything's failed. Over to you. Over to you. It's yours from now on. And from that moment on, 2004, it's been over to our attack dog in the Levant. That was not them say, or George W. Bush saying, we are in your thrall. You've captured our Congress. You've done everything necessary to get the United States on your side. Oh, that's just a side benefit. I got lots of support when I go for Israel. Any president can say that. Congress is on my side when I go for Israel. But the orchestrator of this entire horrible mess is the empire, not Israel.
You're talking about the empire. I would assume that you're talking about a fraction of 1% of the United States, who call the blob, the elites, or whatever we can call them.
Less than
How-
1%. Less than 1%.
Yeah,
But
a fraction of 1%. That's why it's, and how is that going, Larry? In their mind, do you think they're still believing that these sort of policies would help the United States in a long run?
I think the oligarchy and the what we call the deep state, but the people behind Trump, that Trump probably doesn't even know the complete identities of, I think they think so. But I think the American people have an opportunity now to, at least in this particular instance of perfidy, to check them. And I think the American people are waking up to that, incoherently, maybe inchoately even, but they're waking up to it. I would say right now that probably 61 to 65% of the American people would poll as being somewhat aware of what's going on in the Levant and what Israel is doing. And I'd say probably half of that or better is becoming very much opposed to it. And one of the things I think that Charlie Kirk's murder exemplified was just that, because he himself, a very powerful MAGA exponent since he was 17 years old, was questioning it. And you've got others like Tucker Carlson questioning it. And you've got others in the Congress who are now questioning it. Usual characters like Bernie Sanders, who's about as effectual as a tit on a bulldog. But nonetheless, he's speaking truth. You've got people coming around, even in the leadership, in other words. But in the country as a whole, more and more people are awakening to the fact that, you know, when was it? 2016, I think. I gave a talk at the National Press Club, and the talk was entitled, "Is Israel a strategic liability or a strategic asset?" Well, I answered it as a strategic liability, but I came at it from the point of view of, we think it's a strategic asset because what we think is not necessarily what's good for the empire. What we think is we need to dominate the world, period. And Israel is our tool in Southwest Asia for doing that. But it is a liability in my mind, my military mind, and my international relations mind, if you will, because it's going to take the world into global conflict. Now, there are some of these people that want that. There's some of these people that want that for a number of reasons. Some of them as esoteric as they believe 7, 8, 10 billion by mid-century is too many. And so we need to get rid of a lot of people. These are the kind that lust for nuclear war. And then there are others who think that the realignment that's taking place, that you and I have discussed ad nauseum, the shift of power basically from the west to the east, is inimical to their interests, financial and otherwise. And they want to stop that. And they see this as a manner of stopping it, military power and sanctions. And then there's still others who have not made up their minds yet as to which side of that divide they're going to settle on. But they're going to make sure they maximize their profits in the West before they shift flags. And they want to make sure that the transition is rapidly taking place and going to be effective before they shift their flags. Thus has it always been for 5,000 years. I mean, Pericles had the same things to think about. The members of the Peloponnesian League and the Delian League had the same things to think about in lesser terms, regionally and powerfully. But this is history repeating itself again and again and again, especially the history of empire. And we are the latest manifestation of that empire. With one, as I've said many times, and I will never stop saying this because this is a very dramatic difference. No empire in human history has ever possessed the means to not only destroy itself, but to take the world with it. That's the salient difference in 5,000 years of human history in the disappearance of the American empire.
Larry, here is what Tom Brock said about the end game in Israel, in Palestine.
Who is it again?
Tom Brock.
Well, gotcha.
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that because I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Look, the end game, when we say peace, it's an illusion. There's never been peace. There will probably never be peace because everybody's fighting for legitimacy. The end result is somebody wants dominance, which means somebody has to submit. In that part of the world, submit, there's no Arabic word for submit. They can't wrap their head around submit. So eventually, prosperity is the only answer.
So how did the Arab world, as it were, the Islamic world, the Muslim world, I'll expand it to, live for hundreds of years under, for example, the Persian Empire, under the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire, indeed, even under the Ottoman Empire, which was sort of their, their buddy. How did it coexist with Christians, with atheists, with Jews, and everyone else in the world peacefully most of the time, economically and trade-wise, certainly most of the time, if what he says is true, is true. And I love the way he isolated the Arab world as having no word for submit.
And Larry, the keywords in what he said is the prosperity, dominance, and the endless game of Israel in the region. I don't see the dominance coming along with the attitude of Israel. I don't see anything would change.
Let me try to parse what he said there in imperial terms, Nima. We all know what's happened for almost 200 years with regard to the empire's relationship with its own hemisphere, particularly with Latin America, and let's just isolate on South America. The Monroe Doctrine set up a policy of the elites in America merging with the elites in Latin America, particularly in South America, Argentina, Chile, wherever it might be, and raping the people of the hemisphere. That's really what they did. I mean, if you want to look at Nicaragua, you want to look at Panama, you want to look at Honduras, you want to look at any place. That's what we did. The elites in America allied with the elites in South America, Central America, and screwed their people, but made massive profits for both those regional elites and, of course, for the elites in the empire. We have never stopped doing that. Smedley Butler, a Marine general who did that in a number of Latin American countries, testified before Congress that he was a criminal for capitalism, and he was telling the abject, absolute truth. Now, what are we planning on doing for the rest of the world? What have we done to much of the rest of the world? But what are we planning on in Gaza and the West Bank and other places there? The same thing. We want to ally with the elite. Oh, you mean like the Saudis in Riyadh, with whom we're allied? You mean like the Qataris in Doha, with whom we're allied? Like the Kuwaitis? I mean, we're already in that posture. We want to join them, and we will be the hegemon in doing that, in raping and pillaging and plundering their people in consonance with our colonial need for what they have, whether it's oil or whatever. That's the way we operate in the world now. We covered it up a lot, and we had presidents who had better sense about how they publicly express this policy. TR maybe was the first one who really slipped and expressed it a little more blatantly than was really necessary. But and FDR came along and JFK came along, and they had their good neighbor policy and other things like that. But basically what we have done is rape and pillage the rest of the world through our financiers and our business people, allied with their financiers and their business people, at the expense of the bulk of their populations. And something we forget, largely at the expense of our own population, but not so much so that they got restive and started a rebellion or something. So we kept our own population at a level of income in the middle classes that kept them non-rebellious, let's say, content. Well, even that's falling apart now, as you probably well know if you've examined our economy lately. The maldistribution of wealth is just incredible because you cannot do this, as Thomas Piketty has pointed out in both of his books, which I recommend to everyone listening here. Capitalism gone astray, that is, with no real oversight and no real regulation and no fundamentally powerful labor unions. Capitalism gone amok destroys everything. Marx was right when he said, give it enough rope, it'll hang itself. Well, that's pretty much what we're doing, but we're trying to hang the rest of the world with us. And now we're up against a formidable power led by China, but gathering allies all around, that doesn't operate on that philosophy. It remains to be seen how corrupt they will become if they become the ultimate power and an imperial entity within themselves. But right now, they don't operate on that philosophy. So people are flocking to their ranks. Countries are flocking to their ranks. It's inevitable that we clash, absolutely inevitable that we clash. And it's not China or India or Russia or any of the BRICS that are causing this. It's us. It's us. We're calling out the war just as surely as we're calling out colonialism revisited almost everywhere. We're calling for the war. And I'm very, very worried that this route through Iran is going to lead to it. I thought Ukraine was going to do it, and it might yet still, although the Russians have been so successful there that I don't think the empire wants to challenge them there, at least not at the moment. But Iran's a different matter altogether, and Israel is a different implementer altogether. Ukraine is not Israel. Israel is not Ukraine. We don't have nearly the control over Ukraine that we have over Israel.
Here is what the Iranian National Security Chief Ali Larijani said. That he says the Americans demanded we reduce our missile range to under 500 kilometers.
Yeah.
No Iranian would ever accept such BS demands. Larry, we've learned from other members of the national security that Iran has received MiG-29 Su-35s. They're going to receive in volume, in numbers, in HQ-9.
Had new equipment.
S-400s air defense system are already in Iran.
Yeah.
They're prepared. And this member of national security is talking to the government in the Iranian media. Why are you so shy to talk this way? Why you're not informing them that you're totally prepared if they want to attack you?
I like to think it's the Persian way. I've never encountered anyone from that region, military, political, foreign minister, even Ahmadinejad, for example, who bragged. Not really. And I just don't think it's in their personality, in their culture to do that sort of thing. And I have to tell you, your mentioning of the missiles, you know, I was around when the missile control and technology regime was more or less we were trying to force it down Iran's throat, or the parameters of it down Iran's throat, which was, like you said, it limited missile capacity, it limited range, it limited warhead volume, all these other kinds of things. And that was another instrument of the empire to try and manage relations in other parts of the world. But for what purpose? The purpose was not to prevent war between, say, Iran and Saudi Arabia or other countries in other regions. The purpose was to make sure that anytime we had to use our military in that area or for that purpose, that there was nothing that could be formidable to be used against us. In that vein, we would have loved it if Iran would just totally disarm. And when the Shah was there, it was a little bit different, and we gave the Shah quite a bit of weaponry, and including the capacity, initially at least, to build a nuclear weapon. I mean, there was no, I can't say that. The Shah would have built a nuclear weapon if he could have got away with it, I think. But all of this is designed to keep the armaments in a region or in a particular section in a way that'll be conducive to our having to use our own armaments easily and with victory, if necessary. And secondarily, maybe to cut down on the conflict between the countries in the region. But even that is aimed at what I was saying about before with regard to Israel and the Levant, keeping a hegemon in the region who's on our side, and basically keeping all the countries in the region on our side. And what do I mean by on our side? Participating in this rape, pillage, and plunder. You know, we want elites, and we've got them to a certain extent in Saudi Arabia. We've got them to a certain extent in Egypt. We want elites who will plunder their people rather than plunder us and share the wealth with us. And we want to be able to put our businesses and our capitalistic structure on top of them, so to speak, so that we can get as much of it as we possibly can too, whether it's raw materials or it's actual cash. That's the way colonial powers have operated ever since the British taught us all how to do it. And, you know, the British legacy lies across the entire world, no more blatantly than in the Levant. But we have taken the mantle. We are the colonial power now. People don't like to use those terms anymore, but that's what we are. We have colonies all across the globe. And when those colonies are obstreperous, we sanction them, or we use military force against them, or we use our proxies. That's what we are. We're the world's greatest imperial colonial power.
Larry, how do you see the situation in Europe, and how do you see their position in the equation that you're mentioning about the empire, about the East? And we know that in my opinion, under tremendous pressure from the public opinion in Europe, they have changed their mind toward Palestine. They're talking about two-state solution. This is a huge change, by the way. We cannot downplay the decision.
Little late, though. Late.
Yeah.
A little late, and it's obvious why they're doing it, because, like, take Keir Starmer in England, Great Britain, they're doing it because their publics are going to throw them out on their heads, because their publics are waking up to what's happening in the Levant. And so they come out, and, Australia, Canada, France earlier, they come out because their position is politically negatively affected by the fact that they aren't coming out. And so they come out a day late and a dollar short, and they bless something that they know can't possibly happen. Let's just look at why the Europeans, in particular Germany, France, and England, want to snap back sanctions on Iran. It has nothing to do with anything but two factors. One, they don't like Russia, and so they want to punish Iran for supporting Russia in the war in Ukraine. And two, they want to make sure that they are good vassals to the empire, and that they go along with the fact that they know the empire is going to take Iran out, or they think the empire is going to do that, and probably before Christmas. So this is what's made them so adamant to reinvoke sanctions, if you will, snapback sanctions on. Of course, with Russia and China not even participating and being totally opposed to it, it's not going to be all that draconian, but it would be, will be enough to seal the doom of Iran's participation in the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, participation with the IAEA because of that treaty, and its decision, if you will, to build a nuclear weapon. I think the distinction now, I caught a little bit of this with Scott when you were doing the previous interview. The distinction now might be in Iran that the fatwa is against use, not possession. And you could work that out probably even with the Ayatollah or whoever replaces him. So we're marching towards Armageddon, Nima, just like the Christian Zionist relationship wants.
Here is, Larry, what Tom Brock said about arming the government in Lebanon.
Disarming Hezbollah.
Again,
It's the only people who are there. So LAF being mostly Sunnis, there are Shias, and it's a good organization. It's well-meaning, but it's not well-equipped. Because who are they going to fight? Right? We don't want to arm them. We're going to arm them so they can fight Israel? I don't think so. So you're arming them so they can fight their own people, the Hezbollah. I would say the Lebanese, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, because all they do is talk. There's never been one act. We've told them, do you want our help? We'll give you our help. We gave them a playbook. They can't get there. If we talk about trust, quite honestly, in this business, I don't trust any of them. Our interests are not aligned. Ally is a mistaken word. Our interests are not aligned.
With the Syrian regime?
No, with any of them. With any of them in the Middle East.
Including Israel?
Absolutely.
the truth comes out at the end. No, the discussion about Lebanon, it makes me ill because I go back in time to when Lebanon was the flower of the Eastern Mediterranean, and prosperous and economically sound, and along comes Britain, and along comes the United States, and then ultimately along comes Israel and contaminates the whole country. And as long as Israel is sitting there, and as long as Lebanon, possessed of enormous entrepreneurial skills, still possessed of an incredible economic bent, as long as Lebanon is there and in a position to possibly challenge Israel and thus challenge the empire, Lebanon doesn't have a chance. And it doesn't have anything to do with their capability or incapability. It has to do with what we have done to them over the last 100 years. It's disgusting what we've done, but we've done it, and we've done it in the name of empire. We've done it in the name of keeping the Mediterranean safe for the empire and for its vassal state, Israel. His statements are very condescending, really. He's trying not to be condescending. He's trying not to be racist. He's trying his best not to appear what his heart tells me he is. And that is an arch racist, and one who would say, along with Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, and probably a bunch of others in the MAGA crowd, we white people are dominant and best. You brown people and other colors similar, you're subservient to us. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying. Why is Lebanon in trouble? Lebanon is in trouble because we have put them in trouble. Because periodically Israel bombs their economic structure to smithereens for a very reasonable purpose. They want to be the #1 economy in that region. They want the gas, they want the oil, they want everything that appertains thereto. And Lebanon is a challenge. And so let's bust them up every now and then. I mean, the empire and Britain didn't bust them up enough. Let's do it some more. That's the modus operandi of the empire. And that's his modus operandi too. I don't even know if he knows what he's saying. I don't even know if sometimes racism has a way of showing itself in ways that the individual harboring it doesn't even realize he has or she has. I watched it in the South, Nima, in the American South where I was raised. I watched it. I watched my parents who didn't have, they thought, a prejudiced bone in their body. I watched how they treated the inevitably black servants they had, the maids, the gardeners, the people who took care of the landscape and the swimming pool and such. Oh, yes, they were generous with them. They treated them as if they were possibly human beings. But never once did I think, even with my own parents, that those black people working around our home raised to the same level, arose to the same level as my parents. I mean, it's to a Southerner like me who had to live with this his whole younger life. I know what racism is, and I know what closet racism is, and I know what unspoken racism is. And that's what we're seeing here. And that's a huge component of our distaste for Iran and our distaste for the Arab world. They're both Muslims. We don't even know the distinction. Most Americans wouldn't even be able to tell you the distinction. But we look down on them. And that's part of our policy. That is very much part of our policy. You don't have the same inhibitions in using force and imposing sanctions on people you look down on as you do on people you consider your equals.
Terry, I don't see that they appreciate the situation, the complexity of what's going on in Lebanon, because look at what has happened to Syria in the aftermath of Bashar Assad and his government. Look at Christians, all those minority Druze, Alawites and Shia, Sunni, and these are the majority of people are under tremendous pressure in Syria right now as we talk. And the people in Lebanon, they know what's going on in Syria. They know the move going to be toward be a new Syria in Lebanon, a new situation, something like what has happened in Syria. That's why I don't see that the people would go in the same trap that the Syrian people went. How do you see? Are they going to design the same trap for them? And they don't think that these people are going to learn from what has happened in Syria?
Well, I think you saw it from that gentleman and his very carefully expressed disdain for Arabs in general, but also for Persians and others in the region. This is a very, very historical phenomenon that we have this kind of disdain for people who don't look like us, aren't operating like us, don't have the same religion, indeed have a very strange religion in our minds. And so that's part, Sam Huntington's business about his writings about the clash of civilizations and his sort of coming at the end to the conclusion that it didn't necessarily have to happen, defied everything that he'd presented before that conclusion. And I think that conclusion was a fairly sound one, surveying the area, Southwest Asia in particular, but much of the world, and surveying what the empire was doing in that much of the world, that a clash of civilizations was inevitable. Call it Muslim Christian is just to reduce it to reduce it to absurdity. It's really those who have and those who want and have and those who are going to take. It's the Melian dialogue. It's we do it because we can. We do it because we're powerful, and you're not. So what we're looking at, I think, in Syria, what Erdogan might do there, what Israel is doing there, what the current ruling group in Syria is doing there, we're looking at the thing that the empire and its vassals have bred. We've caused this to happen. Who's the greatest creator of terrorism in the world? The empire. Of course the empire is. And its vassals do the same thing. Israel creates terrorists. Israel is now the biggest terrorist in the world, the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. So I hate to reduce it to that factor, but I think it is right to do so. This is all product of the empire, all product of what we're doing in the world to the various peoples that we've encountered and that we find inimical to our interests, and devise ways to take care of them. And when I say take care of them, get them killed, get them sanctioned, or get them out of our way. Regime change, whatever. What does regime change mean in Iran to you, Nima? Does it mean the Shah comes back? Does it whatever it means in the particular, what it means in the general is a subservient country to the empire.
Yeah, exactly. They feel the same way. The people are, that's why the attack on Iran has unified the country, has unified, brought everything.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
see the
And that
threat.
that was not an easy task,
Yeah.
because the government is oppressive, and the government has done some really nasty things to the Iranian people, which they didn't deserve. But now you've unified them because they see what's happening.
It's
When
control.
someone assassinates people in the middle of negotiations, how in the world can they expect any kind of positive thing out of that someone? The miracle to me, Nima, is that they've stuck with this process for as long as they have, with the empire violating the process egregiously at every critical juncture. I wouldn't blame them if they, put up a wall 40 feet high and said, "I dare you to come inside it." We look like what we say they are. Think about that for a minute. We personify what we say they are. Duplicitous, lying, scheming. You wouldn't believe the adjectives I've heard in the halls of U.S. government applied to the Iranians.
Did you hear what Petraeus said to Al-Jolani, to Al-Shara? Here is what he said, Larry.
You personally, how are you holding up under all this pressure? Are you getting time to do some thinking? Are you getting enough sleep at night? Again, I've been there, and it is so very, very hard. And your many fans, and I am one of them, we do have worries.
Yeah.
What do I want to say?
Is that surprising, Larry?
The devil talking to the devil? Yeah, it is a little bit surprising. Although I was looking at, that was David in profile, but he's looking a little old and a little enervated, I would say. Not quite the old David I knew when he was a 2-star general, and he was on a panel with a number of other military people, and a very dynamic personality, no matter what I might think of him later. He was very dynamic, very well spoken, very in charge of his brief. Samantha Power was on the panel. They had some exchanges. I'm trying to think of the woman's name who was Deputy Secretary of Defense. I can't think of her name now, Democratic administration, but they were all on the panel, and David held his own pretty well. I don't think that man I just saw in that tape would be that dynamic guy that I saw. And I'm getting old too, so age does it to you. And being the latest poop on David, I don't know if you've heard this, and I have no idea of its veracity, but it makes a lot of sense to me, is that Paula Broadwell, who brought David down, so to speak, was a Mossad agent. It makes a lot of sense to me, especially the things I have seen, particularly, Nima. Bibi Netanyahu made me think of Gertrude in Shakespeare's tragedy Hamlet, when Gertrude is watching the play within the play that Hamlet has set up to expose, Gertrude's new husband. And Gertrude says about the player on the stage in front of her, I think she protests. No, the lady doth protest too much, methinks. That's what she says. And Netanyahu doth protest too much about having anything to do with Charlie Kirk's murder. So I just have to conclude that Netanyahu did have something to do with Charlie Kirk's murder. These people are just unconscionable, in my view. I'm sure they say the same thing about me. And we had a conversation at the group that I work with about when they're coming for us. Imagine that. Here we are, all military veterans, all having served our country at least a third of our lives in most cases. And we're worried not only about going to jail, but about being assassinated. And think about President Trump. Think about how that must influence his decision making, because there's no question in my mind that Donald Trump is worried about being assassinated. That's the world we've created. That's the world that empires generally do create towards their end. Think about the Romans in the West. Think about some of the other empires in the world and the many assassinations that occur towards the end. Well, we're at that point. We're at that point. And I don't know if David was really being sincere. David's got to know, as having been director of the CIA for a while, of the very, very multicolored, I'll be euphemistic, past of the individual who was on the stage with him. And some of the things that are happening now that I hear they are doing within Syria, persecuting Christians and others. He's got to be aware of that. And yet he's up there, How do you interpret that? How do you interpret that, Nima?
It was so strange calling on one of your... Larry, when it comes to the situation with Ukraine, and before going to Ukraine, did you watch the memorial of the Charlie Kirk?
I watched a little bit of it.
Because
yeah.
You see two sort of messages coming out of MAGA.
At
One
least
of them is the official one, that this guy who assassinated Charlie Kirk was the only person responsible for that. And that's the end of the story. The other side is Tucker Carlson, that is talking about something deeper than that is happening. Which one do you side with?
I have seen so much really credible evidence that the situation did not devolve the way we're being told it did. And then another body of credible evidence that it was very different from what we're being told it is, that I'm holding fire until I see the Warren Commission report on the assassination of JFK. And if it's as much a whitewash as that one was, or I should say the one I participated in. I wrote the testimonies for Condoleezza Rice, or I helped John Bellinger write hers, and I wrote the testimony for Colin Powell before the 9/11 Commission. Both the Warren Commission and the 9/11 Commission were a joke when it comes to reality. So I think we have to wait and see what rolls down the pike with regard to other theories that might be far more credible than the one the administration is putting out, and the one that MAGA leadership would like us all to buy. They don't want us to know that Kirk was questioning Netanyahu in particular and questioning the whole Israel connection in general. They don't want us to know that.
Carol, with the drone attacks in Denmark, in Poland, do you feel that the escalation is going on between NATO and Russia? It doesn't seem that Donald Trump is that much serious to do anything about it, and just leaving the situation the way it was, and it's worsening even.
Viktor Orban is right. The three musketeers, Starmer, Merz, and Macron, need to go to Moscow and need to make amends with Putin and need to ask Putin how they might come to a modus vivendi, a way to live together. That's what needs to happen. Ain't going to happen, of course, but that's what needs to happen, because I think, one, Trump has abandoned them. And, if it really is abandonment, no more arms, no more money, nothing for Ukraine. If it really is that, I'll cheer for Trump. But if it's, we're just going to pass things through to the Europeans, even though we don't have a whole lot to pass through, it's still a statement. It's a statement to Moscow. If it's that, if Trump is just obfuscating and continuing to support them, if you will, then it's a mess. It's a total mess. And Putin seems to have judged it so. And so, as Doug McGregor was saying this morning, and I think he's right, my sources tell me he's right, the Russian army has basically been rested and refitted. They've been taken back for showers and what we call R&R. They've been feeded, they've been fed well and everything else. And there's 300,000 more of them coming forward. And they are ready, even though the season is turning against with the mud and the difficult terrain in Ukraine coming with the winter, even though it's not conducive to armored warfare and to fast moving warfare. They are ready to just continue to slog away, and slog is not really the term because they're moving pretty rapidly, even for the situation that exists and the fact that they've taken some rest and recreation, and are assimilating a whole lot of new troops into the front lines. I mean, he is going to utterly destroy what remains of the Ukrainian military, to include probably getting his hands on, if they don't run and hide, the Azov group. And that's a lot of soldiers, I'm told, because they husband their might. Every time they were told by the Central Ukrainian Authority to go to a endangered spot on the front line, they refused to go, or they faked it and didn't really go because they knew they were going to get slaughtered. They knew they were going to get wiped out. So they husband themselves behind the lines, as it were. And there's still quite a few of them left, sort of a Praetorian guard, if you will, of Nazis. Now, how Putin's going to get at them and kill them, I don't know, but I suspect he's going to try. And what will they do? Maybe they'll leave. They'll go into Poland. They'll go somewhere. And the Poles, I mean, if you're watching the Poles, they've lost up to 10,000 people in Ukraine. Volunteers, mercenaries, whatever you want to call them. And they are saying things that look like they have come to their senses. So that's a major power having come to its senses. All to say, the Europeans need to shut this down. They need to shut this down. If there's any hope at all for keeping some kind of viable transatlantic relationship, NATO's gone. NATO's gone. It's dead. But if there's a chance of keeping the relationship somewhat warm and positive and keeping the nuclear shield America affords them over them, so to speak, and economic and financial and otherwise relations in sound order, then we need to shut this down. We need to shut it down. And I think Viktor Orban is right. Get your little butts to Moscow and come to some kind of modus vivendi with Putin. The other alternative, of course, is that Putin, by necessity, widens the war because they make stupid mistakes. And all this tempest in a teapot, drones flying around and everything, and trying to false flag it or whatever, and get a new support mechanism going for Ukraine is just preposterous. It's preposterous. The Russians have won. Period. Accept it, live with it, get on with your lives. Otherwise, you're going to destroy the whole fabric of the transatlantic relationship and any possibility you have for, once you have developed your own European security architecture, having American support, therefore. And this president is just the one to foul you up.
Russia wants to continue to comply with quantitative restrictions under the New START Treaty, Larry. They're waiting for the United States to decide on it. They're waiting for the Trump administration to get some sort of response. Do you think that the Trump administration would somehow the response would be positive, or you feel that they're gonna, because Donald Trump is so much, you remember what Donald Trump did so far, and it's so much tricky to think of. You're taking that.
Well, there are two strains in the Trump administration, just like there are two strains in the neoconservative globalist panoply of people behind them. One strain, expressed best by John Bolton, is arms control is an absolute farce. There should not be a single treaty, not a one. I mean, John essentially told me that in his office. And then the other strain is arms control does serve a purpose. a real solid purpose if you're careful. Ronald Reagan, for example, trust but verify. If you're careful in the way you craft the agreements, and particularly in the way, and technology gives you a real in now, the way you confirm them. You confirm compliance on a weekly, monthly, semi-annually, annual basis, whatever it might be, from the sky, on the ground, whatever, which is why the Open Skies Treaty was so important, and why other things like the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty was important, because you had teams that went back and actually checked on the ground. Scott Ritter was a member of one of those teams that helped do that. I'm of the school that arms control treaties help. And I became a very, very strong part of that belief, if you will, when Colin Powell essentially gave me a debriefing several years afterwards, but of what he went through with the rest of the arms control team, so to speak, to get the INF Treaty, which was a fabulous achievement because it dealt with those weapons which were most dangerous, those that were most apt to be used, and indeed are being talked about being used today. There are things like the Oreshnik missile, for example, with a nuclear warhead on it. So I'm a big believer in it. And I think it does a number of things for arms races. It curbs them. It keeps people from going hell-bent for leather. Now, there's no real solid way to find out if someone is working in computers behind the scenes to develop a future weapon. And in many respects, a country would probably be foolish not to, like Putin was doing until the INF Treaty disappeared by our abandoning it. He was working. Otherwise, he wouldn't have these hypervelocity missiles and so forth. You can't stop that. You can't stop scientists from going to the blueprints, and perfecting new weapons and things, but don't field them. Don't put the metal and the warhead together. Don't field them. That's what the treaty does for you. I think it's very important that we go back to a treaty regime, and I think we need 9 nuclear weapon states, maybe 10 with Iran. We need them in the treaty, every one of them in the treaty. Israel, if Israel still exists, kicking and screaming, and there's a big if too, because what do you do with those weapons if Israel goes down? What do you do with those nuclear weapons? We have whole strategies, Nima, for leaping on nuclear weapon stockpiles if a state goes down. Looking at states like Pakistan, for example, I was just reading the flood reports on Pakistan this morning. They are looking grim, very grim. Anyway, that's another story, but you do need nuclear weapons treaties, and we need to get Putin involved. And he has said to Trump, apparently, that Xi Jinping will be brought in. We need to get those 3 primary nuclear weapon states involved immediately, maybe through an expanded start, and don't let it expire in February. Just add another party to it. And then we need those 3 to use their good offices to bring everyone in. We would bring Israel in. China would bring Pakistan in. We'd get everybody into the regime. And the treaties would impact everyone, and everyone would have to be signatory. And we would have things like open skies. And these things breed collegiality too. The Scott Ritter will tell you this. When you're doing things on the ground with your enemy to check his componentry, to check his ability to kill you, and he's doing the same with you, you grow closer and you grow more trusting. And that's the thing really missing in this world, trust, and certainly missing in Iran's world. How can they trust us? How can they ever trust us? So that's one thing that nuclear weapons treaties do. They stop arms races, or they make them very difficult, and they build trust in the world. And they keep essentially stockpiles static rather than growing. I'm for them, and I'm for this, and I hope Trump is for it, and I hope he was serious about being for it.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
Thanks
as
for
always.
having me. Thank you for letting me glimpse Scott for a moment there.
See you soon,
That's a
Larry.
very subdued shirt there. That must be one of the Bolsonaro Brazilian shirts.
Because I wanted you to shine, because you're shining. Amazing, beautiful.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Larry.
Take
See you
care.
soon. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.